Ever find yourself like completely out of storage, phones full, laptops groaning? So where'd all this data come from?
It's kind of incredible, right? We produce more information now in like a day or two than entire civilizations used to in centuries, probably.
No kidding. And all those old CDs, DVDs, even those fancy flash drives, they're not exactly future-proof, are they?
Nope. They've got a shelf life, even if it's longer than we once thought.
Which is why this deep dive is so cool, honestly.
Yeah.
We're looking at this 2014 paper. It's called Seemingly Unlimited Lifetime Data Storage in Nanostructured Glass. And it's basically about making data last, well, forever.
Not just more storage, but storage that could outlive us all. And get this, the way they do it is kind of poetic. They use lasers.
Okay, when I hear lasers and glass, I'm picturing those like tourist trap engravings, you know? But this is clearly a tad more advanced.
Oh yeah, we're talking way smaller. This is a femtosecond laser, which means it's pulsing light for like a quadrillionth of a second. That's so short. If that were a second, an actual second would be like 32 million years.
Okay, so super, super short bursts. But what are they doing with these laser beams? Burning data onto the glass.
It is burning in a way, but they're actually creating these structures inside the glass itself. Nanogratings, they're called. Imagine carving something insanely detailed, but on, like, a grain of rice.
So not surface level, but like changing the very makeup of the glass.
Exactly. And they're doing it in 5 dimensions.
Okay, now you've lost me. I'm pretty sure I only experience reality in like 3, maybe 4, if you count time as 1.
Right, you've got your length, width, height, that's 3. But they're also encoding information using how the light is polarized. Think of it like the light wave is twisting, and you can twist it different ways. And then there's the intensity of the laser pulse itself.
So it's not just T where those tiny, tiny etchings are. It's how light hits them from all these different angles.
Yeah, like a super complex hidden code. And get this, they actually tested it. They put a whole digital document on a piece of glass this way. Text, images, the works, and they could read it back perfectly.
No way. That's wild. So you basically need a special laser microscope to even read this stuff. So it's not as easy as just holding it up to the light, huh?
Not quite. You need a special microscope, one that uses polarized light. It's kind of like, have you ever shined a flashlight through a fence? The light looks different depending on how the slats are angled.
Yeah, you get those stripes of light and shadow.
Exactly. So the microscope reads how the light changes as it passes through those nanogratings, and that's how it deciphers the 5-dimensional code. Crazy, right? But the really mind-blowing part of this research was how they tested its durability.
Oh, yeah, they weren't messing around. It's like they were trying to simulate 1,000 years passing in a lab.
More like 1,000,000. They heated that glass up to crazy temperatures. Hundreds of degrees Celsius, basically trying to speed up the aging process to see if the data would degrade.
Did it? Spill the tea.
It survived. Based on their calculations, this method could preserve information for, get this, billions of years.
Billions? Seriously? I can barely keep track of my passwords for 1 year.
Right. It's almost impossible to wrap your head around. It all comes down to something called activation energy. Basically, the energy required to scramble those nanogratings is just astronomically high, so they're incredibly stable.
So we're potentially talking about outliving the sun here, but let's be real. Are we all going to be walking around with glass hard drives in the future? What are the actual chances of this going mainstream?
It's definitely a game changer. There's no doubt about that. Imagine libraries where books never decay, historical archives that truly last forever. And it's not just about the past. Think about scientific data, medical records, all this information that could be crucial for future generations.
It'd be like a time capsule, but on a global scale. But come on, femtosecond lasers, it sounds insanely expensive.
Well, yeah, right now it is. This kind of tech always starts out pricey. Remember those first cell phones? Huge, clunky things that cost a fortune. Now we've got more computing power in our pockets than they had in those old spaceships they sent to the moon.
True. Technology has a funny way of sneaking up on you.
Exactly. So you might not ditch your hard drive just yet, but the potential is there. And it's not even just about storage space. It's about rethinking what's possible with data preservation.
It really makes you wonder what we'll deem worthy of saving for thousands, even millions of years, you know?
That's what's so fascinating to me. The technology is cool and all, but it's the bigger questions it raises. How we view knowledge, what we choose to preserve. It says a lot about us as a species.
Like that line from the paper where they compare this to the leap from cave paintings to written language.
Right. Imagine how much information was lost before we figured out writing. This could be just as big of a shift. We could create a record of human thought and experience that could literally outlast humanity itself.
And if that's not a mind-blowing thought, I don't know what is. So, what do you think the next big leap will be? What comes after storing data for billions of years?
Honestly, it's hard to say. But if this research proves anything, it's that we shouldn't underestimate human ingenuity. We went from carving symbols on cave walls to putting entire libraries on a sliver of glass. What's next? Your guess is as good as mine.
Well, one thing's for sure, it's an exciting time to be alive. It's almost like, what, do we beam it directly into our brains or something? What could possibly be next?
Haha, right. I mean, never say never, but for now it feels like we're talking sci-fi. But this research does show there's always something more. We push those boundaries, what we think is the limit, and then boom, someone's in the lab, changing the game entirely.
So if we're really thinking big, going beyond even this glass tech,
Yeah.
what could it be? Like storing information in actual DNA or using quantum physics somehow.
Those are both being researched, believe it or not. Imagine if instead of giant server farms, we had all of human knowledge encoded in like a drop of water, or even wilder data that exists in multiple states at once. That's the quantum realm. It's crazy stuff.
It does make your head spin a little, but it's exciting too. Like we're on the verge of, I don't know, understanding the universe in ways we can't even comprehend yet.
And that's the beauty of it all, isn't it? It's not about the answers necessarily, but staying curious enough to keep asking the questions. This glass research, it's amazing, but it's just one step on a much longer path.
Absolutely. Well, I gotta say, my brain is definitely full and in a good way. Thanks again to our expert for this incredible deep dive. I knew data storage was important, but this really puts it in perspective.
My pleasure. Always happy to talk about this stuff. It's important to remember knowledge is power, right?
That's the truth. And to everyone listening, thanks for joining us on this journey into the future of, well, the future. We'll keep digging into these fascinating topics. So until next time, stay curious out there. Ever find yourself scrolling through like years of old photos on your phone? Or maybe you're like me, still holding on to that ancient external hard drive.
Yeah.
With, every document from like forever.
Right.
It makes you think, what happens to all this data, right?
Yeah.
It's not like our current tech is exactly known for, lasting forever.
You're hitting a really crucial point there. Because our ability to generate data has totally outpaced, I think, our ability to actually store it. Reliably long-term, I mean.
Right.
Like hard drives crash.
Oh, yeah.
Flash drives die.
Totally.
And even the cloud, as convenient as it is,
Right.
relies on physical servers that won't last forever.
It's a little daunting when you actually stop and think about it. What if there was a way to, preserve information practically forever? Like, what if eternal data wasn't just a sci-fi concept?
Well, that's actually what we're diving into today.
Oh, perfect.
A recent paper in Physical Review Letters has scientists really buzzing about this.
Okay.
The potential of nanostructured glass for seemingly unlimited lifetime data storage.
Seemingly unlimited lifetime. That's a bold claim. But before we get into how it actually works, can you give us an idea of what this technology could do?
So imagine a single disk,
Okay.
about the size of a CD, you might have one lying around somewhere,
Yeah.
holding hundreds of terabytes of data.
Wow.
That's enough storage space for your entire digital life, every photo, video, document, you name it, all on one disk. Now picture that disk lasting for billions of years,
Okay.
even under crazy temperatures.
Okay, now that's what I call future-proofing your data. But how on earth do they get information onto glass in a way that, lasts longer than the pyramids?
It all starts with a very special type of laser, a femtosecond laser, to be exact.
Okay.
These lasers, they emit incredibly short pulses of light. We're talking quadrillionths of a second.
Wow.
And they act like, you could say, incredibly precise chisels etching information onto the glass at a microscopic level, of course.
I can picture that. But how do you actually encode information in these tiny laser etchings? It's not like you can just scribble notes on them, right?
That's where things get really mind-blowing.
Okay.
The laser creates what are called nanogratings within the glass.
Nanogratings.
Think of these as teeny tiny patterns that act like mirrors, reflecting light differently depending on their orientation. By changing, let's say, the direction of these etchings and how deep they are, researchers can essentially create a secret code within a secret code, storing insane amounts of information in 5 dimensions.
Wait, hold on. 5 dimensions. You're messing with me, right?
I promise. It's not as complicated as it sounds.
Okay.
3 of these dimensions are spatial, like the ones we experience every day.
Okay.
Think about a regular CD.
Okay.
The location of the pits on the disk's surface determines the data stored.
Mm-hmm.
The other 2 dimensions are encoded in the nanogratings themselves, how they're oriented, and how intensely they interact with light.
Okay, so it's like a super sophisticated version of Morse code,
Yeah.
but on a microscopic level. And they've actually been able to use this to encode and read back a whole document.
That's right.
Wow.
But here's the really exciting part. This technology could potentially store hundreds of terabytes of data on that single CD-sized disk. To put that into perspective, the Library of Congress, which houses millions of books, photos, recordings, holds an estimated 10 terabytes of digital data.
Wow.
We're talking about potentially fitting the entire Library of Congress on just a handful of these disks.
So you're saying this tiny disk could hold all of recorded human history and culture. That's mind-blowing. And all of that could potentially last for, what was it, billions of years?
Yeah, billions.
But how do we know these nanogratings are that durable?
Well, researchers basically put these nanogratings through the ringer, testing them at extremely high temperatures.
Oh, wow.
To see how they'd hold up. And then they use something called an Arrhenius plot, which basically helps predict the lifespan of materials at different temperatures.
Okay. And what did this Arrhenius plot tell them about the nanogratings? How long can this data actually last?
It suggested that these nanostructures could remain stable for billions of years at room temperature.
Wow.
Even at a scorching 462 Kelvin.
Yeah.
That's almost 200 degrees Celsius.
Right.
This storage could last for billions of years.
Billions of years.
Yeah.
Okay, now you're just messing with me.
It's pretty incredible, right?
That's practically an eternity.
It is.
It makes you wonder, like, what would it even mean for humanity
Right.
to have access to information that could last that long?
Yeah.
We're talking about changing the game for how we even think about knowledge and legacy.
You're absolutely right. It's not just about like storing more data.
Right.
It's about preserving it for practically forever.
Well,
that's where things get really interesting. Imagine future generations having access to just like the sum of human knowledge.
Wow.
Scientific discoveries, historical records, literary masterpieces,
Yeah.
all perfectly preserved.
It's like having a time capsule, but on an epic scale.
Exactly.
What kind of impact could this have on different fields,
Oh, God.
say in the world of science?
Imagine scientists thousands of years from now having access to the raw data from our current experiments, let's say on climate change.
Right.
They could compare that data with their own observations.
Oh, wow.
And gain a much deeper understanding of how our planet has evolved over time.
Yeah.
We could be handing them the keys to unlock some of the biggest mysteries of our planet's past.
That would be incredible. Having that kind of historical perspective could be a game changer for how they approach the future.
Absolutely.
But it's not just about science, is it?
No, not at all.
Think about the possibilities for art history culture.
Precisely.
Yeah.
We could ensure that ancient texts, endangered languages, forgotten art forms, all those irreplaceable pieces of our shared human story are protected for eternity.
It's amazing.
Imagine a world where future generations could experience the richness and diversity of our history in a way that just isn't possible today.
It gives me goosebumps just thinking about it.
Right.
Being able to connect with the past in such a tangible way.
Yeah.
It could completely change our understanding of ourselves and where we come from.
Exactly. And it makes you think about what we choose to preserve and why.
Oh, that's an interesting question.
Right.
Wow.
What stories do we want to tell future generations?
Mm-hmm.
What will our data say about us long after we're gone?
Those are some big questions.
They are big questions.
But it's not just about what we preserve, right?
Right.
It's also about how we present it.
Well, exactly.
Yeah.
That's a great point.
Do we strive for objectivity,
right,
showing the good with the bad, or do we focus on putting our best foot forward for the sake of posterity?
Those are complex ethical and philosophical questions that we as a society will need to grapple with as this technology becomes more sophisticated.
Of course.
It really highlights the responsibility that comes with having the ability to curate information for generations to come.
It's a lot to think about.
It really is.
But let's be real for a second.
Okay.
This technology, it's not exactly like available at the corner store yet.
Not quite.
So what does all of this mean for someone listening to this deep dive right now?
That's the question, isn't it?
Yeah. Like, is this something I need to worry about? Should I be excited? Should I be concerned?
I think it's more about understanding where things might be headed.
Okay.
You know,
Right.
while it's still early days for this 5D optical storage,
Right.
this research gives us a glimpse into a future where, you know, data storage might not be the limiting factor it is today.
Right.
It's a complete game changer.
Yeah.
It really is.
It's pretty wild when you actually stop and think about it.
Oh, yeah. It opens up possibilities. We're only just beginning to grasp, I think.
It really fires up the imagination, doesn't it?
It does.
Like, imagine the potential breakthroughs.
Right.
If we can unlock this power of, like, eternal data.
Eternal data, that's the key.
Yeah.
And it just highlights how vital scientific research and exploration are. I mean, who knows what other mind-blowing discoveries are out there?
Oh, absolutely.
Just waiting to be unearthed.
Waiting to be unearthed.
Exactly.
That's a great point to wrap up on.
Yeah.
So here's a final thought for everyone listening.
Okay.
If you had the power to store something for eternity, what would it be?
That's a good one.
A message, a memory, maybe some secret knowledge. What would it be and why? It's a question worth considering, even if the technology isn't quite there yet. Until next time, keep diving deep into the world of knowledge. Okay, so get this right. Eternal data storage. And we're not just talking about passing down some digital photo albums to your great-great-great-grandkids, okay? We're talking about data that could outlive the entire universe.
Yeah.
Sounds crazy, right? Like something out of a movie.
Yeah.
Well, someone submitted this research paper to us for a deep dive. And get this, it was published in physical review letters.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that's a really big deal in the science world. Like, I'm talking like the Super Bowl of physics journals.
Yeah, it's true. It's very difficult to get published there. So that means these researchers are definitely on to something big.
And that something is using lasers to create a way to store information that is essentially indestructible. Like, they actually use the phrase seemingly unlimited lifetime. And I'm not sure about you, but the minute someone uses the word unlimited, I am very interested.
As you should be, yeah. You know, this paper actually addresses a challenge that we are facing increasingly these days, which is how to store the just insane amounts of data that we're generating.
Right.
Right. Think about it. You know, we've all got those old CDs that start skipping or DVDs that just refuse to play.
Yeah.
Data degradation is a real problem.
Yeah.
And even our current technologies like hard drives, right? They only last so long. They have a limited lifespan.
Exactly. And it's not like we're creating any less data.
No.
It's actually exploding.
Yeah.
So what did these researchers come up with? Lasers, apparently. And not just any lasers. We're talking femtosecond lasers. I'm not going to lie. I'm not entirely sure what that means, but it does sound very impressive.
It is. It is. So imagine a tool that's so precise that it can make changes on a scale smaller than the wavelength of light itself.
Wow.
So we're talking nanometers here, billionths of a meter. To try to put that in perspective, if a nanograding were the size of a marble, a human hair would be as wide as the Grand Canyon.
Okay. Now that is a visual. I can get behind that. But how do they actually use these lasers to store data?
So they use the laser to etch these really tiny, intricate patterns, and they're called nanogratings, onto a piece of fused quartz glass.
Okay.
Which is incredibly durable. So think of it kind of like engraving information onto a surface, but on a scale so small, it's practically invisible to the naked eye.
So instead of ones and zeros on a hard drive, we've got like these microscopic engravings, like holding our data now.
You got it. And here's where it gets even wilder. They call this 5D data storage.
Okay, now you're just messing with me, right? Is that even possible?
So it sounds like science fiction, I know, but it's all about how the information is encoded using these nanogratings.
Okay. 3
of the dimensions are their actual physical position, like inside the glass, like coordinates on a map.
All right. Yeah, that makes sense. 3D. But what about the other 2?
So the 4th dimension is the orientation of these nanogratings. So imagine a compass needle, right? It can point north, south, east, west. These nanogratings can be oriented in different directions too, which allows us to store even more information in the same space.
Okay, I'm following so far. One more dimension to go. So what is that 5th one all about?
All right, so the 5th dimension relates to something called retardance, which is essentially how these nanogratings can twist light in different ways. By carefully controlling this twist, we can squeeze even more data into the same area.
Oh, wow. So it's not like bending space-time or anything.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
more like we're just being really clever with like light and these tiny structures to just cram in as much information as possible.
Exactly. Exactly.
But did it actually work? Like, were they actually able to store anything using this method?
They did. And they didn't just store like a simple text file or anything. They stored a copy of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights.
Wait, really?
Yeah.
The entire Declaration of Human Rights is on these tiny little nanogratings.
Well, it was a relatively small file size, but the fact that they were able to store and retrieve digital information using this method is a huge step forward.
Wow.
They even stored a PDF file as well to show that this method could handle more than just simple text.
Okay. That's really impressive. But let's talk about like storage capacity for a second.
Yeah.
Like, how much data are we talking about here? Is this something that could actually be practical, like for everyday use?
So hold on to your hats, because this is where it gets really interesting. While the experiment itself was on a small scale, the researchers estimated that using this 5D nanograding method, you could potentially store hundreds of terabytes of data on a single disk, like the size of a CD or a DVD.
Hundreds of terabytes.
Yeah.
So to put that in perspective, you could store every movie ever made and still have room for like your photo albums.
Right.
And this is all on something the size of a DVD.
Yep.
That's incredible. But how long could this data actually last? Because
Yeah.
they did like throw around the phrase seemingly unlimited lifetime.
Right.
But is that realistic?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? So let's unpack that idea of eternal data, because forever is a very, very long time.
Yeah. So while these nanogratings seem super stable, calling it eternal,
Oh, yeah.
even with research this promising, it's a bold claim. I think we have to remember there's a difference between, bold scientific claims and like the reality of something lasting forever, especially when you're dealing with timescales that are just beyond human comprehension.
Right. Because how do you even test if something can last longer than the pyramids or something? Did they, stick this nanograding disk in a time machine?
Right. A time machine would be pretty handy for this, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
But no, they used a really clever process called accelerated aging. So they basically cranked up the heat way beyond what these nanogratings would ever experience under normal circumstances. So simulated the passage of time with a superpowered oven.
Yeah, exactly. At those crazy high temperatures, the molecules in the glass are zipping around a lot faster. Think about it, like kids hopped up on sugar. This simulates, in a much shorter time frame, the wear and tear that would happen over eons at just normal room temperature.
Oh.
By seeing how much the nanogratings degraded under these extreme conditions, they can kind of extrapolate and calculate how long they might last normally.
Wow, that's really clever. So did they hold up? Did these nanogratings crack under pressure?
So they were incredibly resilient. Remember how we were talking about them being like these tiny crystals etched into the glass? Well, those crystals have a very high activation energy.
Activation energy. Oh, there's a term I haven't heard in a while. Can you give us a little bit of a refresher on that?
Of course, yeah. So imagine you need a spark to start a fire.
Right.
Right. Activation energy is kind of like that spark, but on a molecular level. It's the minimum amount of energy needed to trigger a chemical reaction, like the kind of reaction that it would take to break down these nanogratings.
Okay.
Because they have such high activation energy, it takes an enormous amount of energy to actually disrupt their structure, which makes them super, super durable.
So high activation energy basically means these tiny crystals are like molecular Fort Knoxes.
Exactly.
Really hard to break into.
Very secure.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're not just talking about a few years here. Based on their tests, these nanogratings could potentially last for billions of years at room temperature.
Wow.
That's older than the Earth itself.
Okay. Now that's what I call thinking long term.
Mm-hmm.
But you did say estimated, right?
Right.
Predicting the future, especially billions of years out, that's got to be a total shot in the dark.
Yeah, you're right to be cautious. As compelling as this research is, predicting the future is, it's nearly impossible, especially over those kinds of timescales.
Yeah.
There could be unforeseen circumstances, new discoveries. Who knows? The environment could change in ways we can't even imagine.
Right.
So, yeah.
So eternal data is maybe a little bit of an overstatement.
For now, I'd say extremely long-term is probably a bit more accurate. Forever is just a really tough concept to prove scientifically. But even if it's not technically eternal, imagine the potential, right?
Yeah.
Entire libraries, historical archives, even our digital photo albums, all preserved for generations far beyond our own.
Yeah, it's like burying a message in a bottle, but instead of it washing up on some beach somewhere. It could outlive the ocean itself.
Exactly.
But let's be real. There have to be some downsides, right?
Yeah.
Aside from the whole bending the laws of physics thing.
Right. And you bring up a great point. It's not all sunshine and rainbows. There are some practical challenges that we really need to consider, and those are just as important as the scientific achievements themselves.
Like what are the hurdles we need to clear before we can all ditch our cloud storage subscriptions and go all in on like eternal data?
Well, for starters, femtosecond lasers are, pretty cutting edge technology.
Yeah.
Which usually means a pretty hefty price tag.
Right.
The process of etching these nanogratings is just incredibly precise, and right now it takes quite a bit of time.
Yeah.
So that obviously adds to the cost. If we're talking about scaling this up to handle like everyone's data,
right,
we're talking, significant investment. We're talking some serious innovation in terms of bringing that cost down.
So like eternal data flash drive on Amazon just yet?
Not quite yet. Give it a few years.
Okay. Anything else?
Speed is another one. So reading data from these nanogratings, that's actually pretty straightforward.
Okay.
It's writing the new data, especially huge amounts of it, that's where it gets a little tricky. Right now, it's kind of like, imagine a snail trying to keep up with a jet plane.
Yeah, I get it.
That's kind of where we're at with the technology.
Okay, so cost and speed. Any other, like, roadblocks in our way?
We also need to think about compatibility.
Okay.
Like our computers, our phones, everything, right? They're all designed around hard drives, flash storage, that sort of thing. Switching to nanograting storage, that would mean a complete overhaul. And I'm not just talking about the physical devices themselves. I'm talking about the software, the way we organize data, everything.
Right. It'd be like inventing this, like, amazing new language.
Right.
But having no one to actually speak it with, right?
Exactly.
Like, what good is eternal data if we can't access it? We need some kind of, like, digital Rosetta Stone or something.
That's a great analogy. Like, we might have all of this incredible information potentially lasting for billions of years, but without the right tools to actually understand it, it just becomes meaningless.
Totally. So it seems like we're not quite ready to ditch our external hard drives just yet.
Not just yet.
But the potential of this technology is honestly just too mind-blowing to ignore. So what's exciting right now? Like, what are researchers working on to make this a little more, well, I don't know, down to earth?
Yeah, so there's a huge push right now to develop even faster, more powerful lasers. We're talking about lasers that can pulse quadrillions of times per second.
Quadrillions. Okay, now I'm getting lost in the zeros here.
Yeah, it's a big number.
But faster lasers, that equals faster writing speeds.
Exactly.
Which means we might actually be able to solve that whole snail versus jet plane problem.
Exactly. And it's not just speed. They're also working on making these lasers smaller, more energy efficient. And that opens up a whole world of possibilities for more practical, more affordable applications down the line. Imagine, like, a device, right, on your desk that could etch these nanogratings onto these tiny, incredibly durable chips. It could change how we back up our data, how we archive information, everything.
Wow. So from storing entire libraries on a disk to backing up our phones on something smaller than my fingernail, the future is a wild place.
It really is.
But it's not just the tech that needs to, like, evolve, right?
Right.
I mean, if we're talking about data lasting for millennia, don't we kind of have to, like, rethink how we even think about data itself?
That's a brilliant point. It's something researchers are really grappling with right now. If we're going to get serious about eternal data, we have to consider how people in the far future, maybe even different civilizations, will access and understand that information.
Right. It's like burying a time capsule, right? You can't just assume that people are going to speak our language or recognize our technology. I mean, who knows? Cat videos might be completely baffling to them.
Exactly. This raises all sorts of fascinating questions about how we preserve data, how we provide context, and even just what knowledge really means across these vast stretches of time.
Wow.
How do you build a system of information storage that goes beyond not just the technology, but the culture as well? It's a challenge that's going to take, scientists, engineers, historians, linguists, everyone working together.
That's like a pretty incredible team you've assembled there. So for our listeners who are now ready to ditch their cloud storage subscriptions and go all in on eternal data, what's the takeaway?
Yeah, for now, it's probably best to, hang on to those hard drives and those cloud storage subscriptions. This is technology that's still in its early stages.
Right.
It'll be a while before it's as common as, your phone or your laptop. But the research that we've explored today, it's just a glimpse into a future where data storage is no longer limited by the lifespan of our technology, a future where we can preserve our history, our knowledge, our stories for generations far, far into the future.
It's like holding a tiny little piece of the future in our hands right now.
Yeah.
A future where information truly does stand the test of time. Who knows? Maybe one day our digital descendants will be thanking us for having the foresight to invest in data storage that's as close to eternal as we can get.
And just as importantly, they'll be thanking us for, thinking critically about what it means to create information that could outlive us all. Because the story of data storage isn't just about ones and zeros, right? It's about preserving who we are for as long as possible.
That is a fantastic point to end on. I'll leave you with this thought. If you could send a message to the future, a piece of information designed to last for billions of years, what would it be? What do you want those future generations to know about us, about our world, about what we dreamed of? Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and as always, keep diving deep.
Okay, so are you ready to have your mind blown? Because today we're diving deep into something straight out of science fiction, data storage. But not just any storage. We're talking about storage that could last longer than humanity itself.
I know, right? I mean, think about it. We all freak out when our digital photos start to fade or an old hard drive crashes. Imagine if we could store information that would outlast even the pyramids. That's what I thought. Well, get this. A new scientific paper claims to have cracked the code, and they're using a surprising material to do it: glass.
Yeah, it's true. And not just any glass. We're talking about nanostructured glass etched with lasers at a scale that's almost impossible to really wrap your head around.
Okay, so they're etching this glass with lasers. I'm already lost.
It's wild. And this isn't some futuristic fantasy. Researchers have actually built a prototype.
They built it, really. Yep. And get this. It can hold hundreds of terabytes of data.
Hundreds. Wait, on a single disk.
On a single disk.
Hold on, my laptop can barely hold one. So are we saying this disk could hold, like, the equivalent of a whole library?
More than one, actually. And it's not just the storage capacity that's super impressive. They've put these glass disks through some intense testing, simulating thousands of years of aging with extreme heat.
Oh, wow. So they're really trying to break them.
Exactly. And the data, still intact.
So it's like a digital time capsule then?
Essentially, yeah. And their research suggests these disks should last for billions of years.
Billions. Okay, we need to unpack this. So, like, they're using lasers to etch tiny patterns onto glass. But how tiny are we talking? Smaller than a grain of sand?
Way smaller. Think nanometers.
Nanometers?
Yeah, to give you some context, a human hair is about 80,000 nanometers wide. These laser-etched nanostructures are a mere 20 nanometers.
Wow, that's tiny. It's like, I don't even know, engraving the entire Library of Congress onto, like, the edge of a pinhead or something. It's unbelievable. But how do these, like, microscopic engravings actually turn into data? I mean, it's not like they're etching ones and zeros into the glass.
It's actually even cooler than that. The information is actually encoded in 5 dimensions.
5 dimensions. Okay, now you've lost me. I'm picturing some kind of interdimensional data cube, and it's making my head spin.
Think of it this way. So you're familiar with the usual 3 spatial dimensions, right? Length, width, and height.
Right, of course. Length, width, height, yeah.
Okay, now imagine being able to manipulate light within the glass, controlling not just where it goes, but also how it vibrates.
Okay, I think I see where you're going with this.
That's essentially what they're doing with what's called birefringence.
Birefringence?
Yeah, by meticulously controlling the orientation and strength of this birefringence, using those nano-sized patterns we talked about, they're able to encode information in 5 dimensions, all within the glass.
So they've created this tiny, mind-bogglingly complex 5D structure inside this glass, and that's what makes it work.
Exactly. That's the secret sauce.
Okay, but how can this data actually last for billions of years? Like, what's the science behind this seemingly unlimited lifetime that the research paper keeps mentioning?
Well, think about how we traditionally store data, right? Photos fade, CDs scratch, even our trusty hard drives eventually fail. That's because all these materials are vulnerable to heat, humidity, and just, the natural process of degrading over time.
Yeah, even the flash memory in our phones and laptops has a shelf life. They don't last forever.
Exactly. But these nanostructures, etched into the glass, they're incredibly stable.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
Good.
To test this, the scientists basically took the glass and baked it at insanely high temperatures to, simulate thousands of years of aging, but in a much shorter amount of time.
So like a stress test for data.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And, the amazing part is even under these really extreme conditions, the nanostructure is barely degraded at all.
Wow, they must have been blown away. So we're really talking about like data that could last longer than the pyramids, longer than practically anything else on Earth.
Well, that's certainly what the research indicates, yeah. They used what's called an Arrhenius plot to chart how fast this data decay happens. And honestly, the results were astounding. At room temperature, this glass could theoretically hold your data for longer than the Earth has even existed.
Okay, now that is mind-blowing. So we're talking about the possibility of creating a digital time capsule that could potentially preserve information until, like, long after humans are gone. That's crazy.
Yeah, it's a possibility that's both exhilarating and, I have to admit, a little bit daunting to think about.
Yeah, I don't know about you, but I need a minute to process all that. We're talking about like a fundamental shift in how we even think about information. But before we spiral into an existential crisis or anything, let's maybe bring this back down to earth for a sec. How close are we to actually, using this technology? Like, are we picturing scientists huddled around a laser the size of a car, or is this something that could actually be, like, practical?
Well, it's closer than you might think.
Really?
Yeah, you won't be backing up your vacation photos on a glass disc just yet, but there are some very real-world applications that are not that far off.
Like what? Okay, give me the good stuff.
One area where this technology could be really huge is data archiving. Think like museums, libraries, government archives, places that need to store massive, and I mean massive amounts of data for a really, really long time.
Oh, right. Yeah, like those giant server farms we hear about, the ones gobbling up all that energy. So you're saying this glass could, like, replace all that?
Potentially, yeah. It could not only store way more data in a fraction of the space, but it's also, get this, incredibly energy efficient. Once the data is etched in, it doesn't need any power to maintain it.
Wow.
And it's incredibly durable. No more worrying about fires, floods, or even like EMP blasts wiping out all our precious records.
That's some serious peace of mind. So wait, are we talking about a future where libraries are like filled with these glass discs instead of dusty old books? I kind of love it.
That's a possibility. And it's not just about preserving the past either. Think about scientific data, medical records, even our cultural heritage. Music, film, art, all that stuff. This tech could ensure that it's all preserved for like future generations.
It's like, I don't know, passing down a legacy not just to our kids and grandkids, but to civilizations thousands of years from now. It's kind of amazing.
Exactly. It's a way of contributing to like the collective memory of humanity. It's ensuring that all our stories, our knowledge, our creativity, it all endures.
Okay, now I'm getting chills. But this also brings up a pretty big question. If we have the power to actually make information, like practically immortal, how do we even decide what to preserve? It's a lot of responsibility, right?
It is a profound question.
Yeah.
And honestly, one that deserves some very, very careful consideration. Like, do we just focus on our greatest achievements, the art, the scientific discoveries, or do we try to present a more, balanced picture of humanity, flaws and all?
It's like we're curating a message for the distant future. Do we want to show them our highlight reel, or do we include the bloopers too? I don't know.
It's a debate that will likely continue, as this technology evolves. But it's a really important one to have because, after all, if we have the ability to actually etch our mark onto the fabric of time, we better make sure it's a message worth receiving, right?
Yeah, you're right. It's definitely a big conversation to be having. But as much as I love, geeking out about the future and all, let's maybe bring it back to the present for a minute. We've talked about all this crazy potential, but what are the chances this actually becomes a reality? Are we all going to be carrying around glass memory cards someday or what?
Well, it's always smart to be a little cautious with any new tech, right? But this isn't just hype. The science behind it is rock solid. We've seen the research, the experiments, the potential is definitely there.
Okay, but potential doesn't always mean it's going to work in the real world. What are the biggest hurdles to making this, commercially viable? Like, what's holding it back?
So as we touched on earlier, speed and cost are the two biggies right now. The writing process, getting that data onto the glass, it needs to be a lot faster. And the equipment, it's got to become more affordable, more user-friendly.
So it has to go from like a lab experiment to something you could actually mass produce, right?
Exactly. But here's the exciting part. Those aren't impossible hurdles to overcome. We're seeing breakthroughs all the time in laser technology, nanofabrication, even material science. What seems impossible today could be totally commonplace tomorrow. It's moving fast.
So you're saying there's hope?
Oh, yeah, there's a good amount of hope. It might be a while before you and I are backing up our computers to a glass disk, but for specific uses, like archiving super important data or preserving those cultural artifacts we were talking about. I think this tech is like poised to completely revolutionize how we think about storing information.
It's an exciting thought for sure. And it really speaks to the ingenuity of these researchers, like they're pushing the boundaries of what we thought was even possible.
Absolutely. It's a good reminder that scientific progress is driven by curiosity, that desire to explore the unknown, to challenge what we think we know.
Well said. And you know what? This whole conversation has been a mind-bending journey from like the intricacies of nanostructuring to the crazy implications of practically eternal data. It's been wild.
It's always a blast to dive into this stuff with you. It's these kinds of conversations that make this whole thing so rewarding.
I couldn't agree more. And for our listeners who are, just as fascinated by this as we are, we'll make sure to link to the research paper and some other interesting resources in the show notes. So as we wrap up this deep dive into the world of eternal data, I want to leave you with one last thing to ponder. If you had the opportunity to preserve something, a message, a piece of art, a memory, anything for billions of years, what would it be and why? It's a question worth thinking about. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and never underestimate the power of a good question.
Ever find yourself wishing you could send a message to the future?
Yeah.
Like really far into the future. Not a text that'll vanish in the cloud, but something way more permanent.
Way more is right.
We're talking about a storage method that could last for billions of years.
Yeah, we're talking about making the pyramids look like they were built yesterday.
It sounds insane, like totally science fiction-y, but it's not. There's a real scientific paper from 2014. It's called Seemingly Unlimited Lifetime Data Storage in Nanostructured Glass.
Big title.
Right. It was published in a pretty prestigious journal, the Physical Review Letters. And it's all about, get this, using lasers to etch data into glass.
And not just any glass. This is fused quartz, which is, known for being super durable.
Okay, so I have to ask, why go to all this trouble? What's so bad about our hard drives and cloud storage and all that?
Well, I mean, think about it. The amount of data we're creating, it's like exploding, right? And our current methods, even the ones meant for like archives, they just weren't built for these timescales. Like we're talking about keeping information safe for like future generations. I mean, potentially millions of years from now.
Okay, so instead of fading like an old photo, we're etching data into glass with lasers. I have so many questions. How does this even work?
It's incredibly precise. Imagine like a microscopic 3D grid inside the glass.
Okay.
A femtosecond laser, which pulses crazy fast, creates these tiny patterns within this grid. Like we're talking nanostructures here.
Yeah.
They're so tiny you can only see them with these really specialized microscopes.
So we're talking about encoding information on a scale that's like unimaginable almost.
Yeah, you could say that. And it's not just about those three spatial dimensions either. The orientation of these nanostructures, like the way they're positioned and the strength of the laser etching, those encode information too. It's kind of like a 3D QR code, but instead of, just black and white squares, we're messing with manipulating light itself across 5 dimensions.
5 dimensions of data storage. Okay, now that is wild. It's like something out of Star Trek. But how do you even read this data back? Do you need like some futuristic device or something?
You do need a special microscope, yeah. But the idea is actually pretty interesting. So by analyzing how light passes through those nanostructures, scientists can actually decode the information. It's like shining a light through one of those meticulously crafted stained glass windows and being able to read a whole story just from the patterns.
Okay, that's seriously cool. But let's get real for a sec. How much data can you actually fit on one of these glass discs? And maybe more importantly, how long does it take to write the data? Because let's be honest, we live in a world of instant gratification.
Yeah, you got a point. Speed is definitely important. And this whole thing, it's still being developed. Back in 2014, they were only getting writing speeds like comparable to, those old school internet connections. Not exactly lightning fast, not by today's standards, that's for sure. But the potential, I mean, it's definitely there.
That's good to hear. That's good to hear. But let's talk about the really mind-blowing part. The lifespan. You're talking about billions of years. Billions. How can they even say that?
It's all about the stability of those laser etched nanostructures inside that fused quartz. Usually heat chemical reactions. That's what messes with data over time. But these nanostructures, they're really resistant to all that.
So it's like creating a message in a bottle, but instead of tossing it in the ocean, you're etching it into this glass that could, like, I don't know, outlast the pyramids or something.
Yeah, that's a great way to think about it. The researchers actually, they really went for it. They subjected these glass discs to crazy high temperatures, like trying to simulate, the effects of time, but like on a massive scale. And you know what? The data, it stayed totally intact, totally. Sure. Based on those tests, they figured out that at room temperature, this data could last for, well, an unimaginable amount of time. I mean, we're talking longer than the current estimated age of the universe.
See, that's what I mean. That's just incredible. Like, just imagine future historians, right?
Mm-hmm.
Thousands of years from now, digging around, and they find one of these discs, and they can actually access like information about us, about our civilization. It's like a time capsule, but on a whole other level.
Absolutely. It really makes you think, what information would we want to save on that kind of time scale? What stories would we tell? What knowledge would we want to pass on to them?
It's a huge responsibility, isn't it? Yeah. I mean, we're not just picking what to watch on Netflix tonight. We're talking about shaping like a legacy. Yeah. A legacy that could last for billions of years. Yeah. What would we even want them to know about us?
That is a really deep question, and it goes way beyond just the technology and gets into like our values, our priorities. What does it even mean to be human? Like, that's what we're talking about here.
It'd be like, I don't know, like trying to explain the internet to a caveman.
Right.
We can barely wrap our heads around what life would even be like in thousands of years, let alone billions. I know, right? It's like, what would they even make of it all?
Who knows, right? But the thing is, this urge to leave a record, to like make our mark, it's kind of a human thing, isn't it?
Yeah, I get that.
Think about those ancient cave paintings, the pyramids, even the books we still read today. They're all saying something, right, about the people who made them, their hopes, their fears, all of it.
It's like we have to leave something behind, some kind of, I don't know, connection to something bigger than ourselves.
Right, and this technology, it gives us a whole new way to think about that. Legacy. And get this, the researchers, they actually managed to encode a 310 kilobyte PDF file onto one of these glass discs.
Wow.
Which, okay, it doesn't sound like much, right? Not with our terabyte hard drives and all that, but still, it proves that it's possible, that we can store like real data, not just, a simple message.
So are we going to start etching like the entire Library of Congress onto these glass discs and shooting them out into space? Or
yeah. Hold your horses. It's still early days, remember? Yeah. Figuring out how to scale this up to handle like all the data we produce. That's a huge challenge. But even before that, we have some bigger questions to answer, right? Like, if we can store information for billions of years, what do we choose?
It can't just be about like cramming in as much as possible, right?
Right. We have to make choices, decide what's really important, what's worth saving.
And who even gets to decide that? Is it scientists, historians, the government, or should it be like everyone gets to say?
Exactly. Tough question.
It's almost like we've been handed the keys to the Library of Alexandria or something, but with the added pressure of knowing that whatever we do could last forever.
New pressure, right?
Right. But seriously, this is huge. This is way bigger than just data storage. It's about the future of, I don't know, like memory itself.
That's a great way to put it. And on that note, I think I'll leave you with this. Just imagine you get to send a message, one message, to those future generations. Yeah. Etched in glass, lasts for billions of years. What do you say? What's the one story you want to tell?
It's a great question, and one we hope will stick with you long after this deep dive. Thanks for joining us, everyone. And until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep searching for those hidden pieces of knowledge that connect us all across time, across space,